What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Marvel Pair Up, your mini-series upon mini-series for every Marvel show, and pairing it up with the history and thematic ideas of that genre to see what we're infusing into the MCU. Whether it's teen comedies and Miss Marvel or sitcoms and WandaVision, we're doing all of them. As always, I am your host, Blake Schultz, and with me is Terrence Tatum.
Hello, everyone.
And Jamie Jirac.
Hello.
And we are on episode 4 of She-Hulk, introducing now one of the most popular and amazing characters into the MCU that we hope to see for years and years to come. And pairing it up with Adam's Rib, a wonderful movie that we'll talk so much about because I had never seen it. And what an interesting little piece of film history. What did you guys think of the episode?
Oh, I mean, come on, Madison for life. We interviewed her on Phase Zero, and she's like that. That is what she's like.
Oh, that's just her?
Yeah. I mean,
awesome.
Not just like sober. Like she wasn't drunk.
Yeah.
But like
the energy is up there.
Yeah, she was so like that, and it was a delight. Like I love how much everybody embraced her because she's like, oh, dumb character, and it's so fun, and pairing her with Wong was so great, and everything about this episode was fun. I think it is appalling that man took one look at Tatiana Maslany and left. Like that's the most unbelievable thing that's ever happened.
Yeah, yep. That's the one part of the whole thing. I was like, wait a minute. I think them both. I'd want both of them.
Exactly. 2 for 1.
Yeah, I was like, how, in what universe would you walk in to this gorgeous lawyer woman who's successful and pretty and likes you and is also a superhero and be like, nah, I don't know.
Like people are like, well, people have types. Okay. Well,
first of all, no, they don't.
You're getting a Hulk.
You're getting a bonus.
That's like, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
But I really like the episode.
Yeah, this was probably one as far as comedy goes, the episode that I was like, they're nailing this one on all, because you don't, a lot of the shows, like we watched all these sitcoms before in the past, a lot of those shows, you find a character they just introduce out of the blue, and you're like, and everybody sort of gravitates to, and you're like, that's the one, that's who that's the person I want to see pop up from time to time as we go along this. I love that we also got sort of some action beats in this. We got the little demons and all that stuff. I was like, oh, we got to see She-Hulk put her powers together as well as the dating stuff. I love how self-deprecating Jen is about herself and everything. It all comes together really well. But like, as long as you can put Wong, and she even says it at the beginning, which I love. But as long as you have Wong in here, I'm sold. And the whole, if we don't find these bottomless Jen spots for these guys, I'm gonna have a problem.
Yeah, I agree. This was easily, I think, my favorite so far. It had the action that I was like, ooh, we get to see some like real Hulk fighting and like weird action with demons. It felt so like a comic book, which is a weird thing to say. But I'm like, yeah, there's always like weird storylines where it's just like, hey, one of the sorcerers is here and now we just have demons. And I know that doesn't really match the tone of this comic, but that's the world we live in. Which I think is what this episode did a very good job of getting to, is like the world that they live in. We're seeing the weird people who just want to date superheroes, who have some sort of the boys type fetish stuff. And like, we're seeing more. I really am now. I made that Vought comment, I think, during Miss Marvel. And I am like, all right, who's running the, we have knockoff Avengers stuff now. So who's doing some company out there is making money. We're seeing, characters like Madison, who is a show-stealing character and hilarious. And we haven't really seen a like fun party drunk in any of these shows either. But all of these people who have lives outside of just like being a hero, like it reminds me of the comic Marvels that they did. That was just a photographer, and it's the first time he sees Spider-Man and the first Fantastic Four fight, and just like what living in New York is like in that world. And I really am enjoying that.
It's the most lived in that we've been out in the Marvel universe outside of the superheroes. Like, oh crap, we're actually spending time with like the quote unquote normal people. Yes, Jen is here, but she's sort of our beacon to get to these normal folks that exist in this world. And I was like, that's sort of a brush. It's kind of what we're talking about. We wanted with damage control and all that stuff. That's sort of what we're getting hints of that here. But just through the eyes of Jen, who's the perfect person because she breaks the fourth wall and talks to us and kind of like feeds us into all of this stuff.
And I love her wall breaking. I love every turn. I'm like, this is great. I love it. This is so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, the show continues to be great. Wong continues to be great. Just keep giving me Abomination and Wong, and I'll just keep it coming. Let's not stop. Every part of the show, I'm like, don't stop. Just keep. Let's go. More stuff with the family, more stuff in the law firm, more Megan Thee Stallion, all of it. I do think we're getting to some cool places, because so often the drama comes from these like big cataclysmic things, and this really is like, yeah, dating in your 30s sucks. I can tell you that. It's tough to make you got to make so many profiles on these dating apps of just like, well, that photo didn't work. I gotta go try this one out, and maybe if I shave or do this or you don't shave and then you do for the date and they think you're catfishing them, which happened to me.
I just think one of the most amazing and simplest things of this is the whole dating, her going on like the date that we see the date montage, but just those people kind of just talking about themselves, even when you're in the presence of She-Hulk. Like there's somebody much greater than you, and you're like, well, yeah, I'm doing this and I'm doing this. No one cares.
Yeah,
Can you ask her about herself? Can you ask her about her? That's like, oh, guys are still being guys, even when She-Hulk's across from.
It also felt the most like we keep hearing, like I at least keep fixating on like the Seinfeld parts of this. I'm like, oh, this was the most Seinfeldian. Like, well, you've got to make a She-Hulk one. Well, I don't want to be a She-Hulk. Well, you gotta have. And I was like, yeah, this is very Jerry and George in the apartment. It's like, well, you're a superhero, George, but I'm not always a superhero, Jerry. I can't always do that. What, am I gonna walk around in suits the whole time? She's gonna wake up next to me, a normal guy. I would love it. Yeah, it's great. Everything's great. The comedy's really coming together in a big way, and I think that brings us very, very smoothly into Adam's Rib, one of the, if not the first legal satire law comedy from, I believe, 1947. Is that correct? I didn't, in fact, write it down. 49. But it was the sixth movie written for these actors specifically. And for those who don't know, and I'm sure plenty of people don't, it follows two married lawyers who get an interesting case in a domestic issue wherein a wife shoots her husband and the husband must prosecute while she defends the wife. And it gets into big ideas of feminism and the law changing, and is this right or wrong? And oh, well, when the man cheats, we say it's going to happen, but when the woman does these things, we shun her from society. And so many things that are like baked into the DNA of this show, which one is like, oh, not enough has changed since we made black and white cinema. And two, like you can really feel the impact of this movie throughout almost every legal satire we've talked about. So many of them deal with how the law changes and the ethics of it, and the written law versus the what is right, because her husband comes from such a like, you might be right, but she shot somebody.
Yeah.
And it is a very challenging movie in that way, because every now and then I was like, yeah, she did shoot him.
I struggled with that a lot. Because I'm like, yeah, the argument's true. You should try women and see women the same way you do men, but it does none of this. Why is this the case that she's gunning for and going behind? Because we know she shot her husband. We watched her do
this. This isn't the one to put your flag in the sand and like, I'm gonna back.
I love Katharine Hepburn deeply, and her and Spencer Tracy are literally one of the most iconic chemistry couples in the history of cinema. Like there are very few people who have what they had back then, and so I loved watching them go at it against each other. But I'm like, I'm supposed to be rooting for Katharine Hepburn, and I'm just not. I'm just not, because the woman shot her husband, and that's just. And in the end, I think Spencer Tracy does finally convince her that, like, because he pulls a fucking gun on her and is like, see how it feels?
That's the only
that was such a
way she'll understand it.
Well, there were so many beats in this movie that I was like, is this supposed to be funny? Like, even like the beginning is just like straight up this guy cheating, and she walks in and blasts him, and I was like, did I rent the wrong film on Amazon?
Like, I don't see Katharine or Spencer, and this looks very dark. What am I getting into?
I will say the woman who played the wife who shot her husband, I loved her in this. I didn't. She's in I'm looking up her name right now because I forgot. Judy Holliday. She's in a bunch of stuff, but like she was like in a movie where you have where Katharine Hepburn's in there, if I'm paying attention to you at all, you're doing a very good
Yeah.
job.
Especially as a woman, yeah.
Yeah.
This is one of the first. I mean, I've seen Catherine do a couple of things, and I'm not that extensive on her catalog. I will say after watching this movie, I was like, oh, I need to brush up on everything.
Have you seen Philadelphia Story?
I have.
That's number one. Okay,
Yes,
yeah, that's as long as you've seen that. That's the for me,
but she's gorgeous, but she's super talented, and the chemistry that they have together was just fascinating. And I was like, but yeah, the entire film, I'm sitting here like, yeah, you've got points. You got some great points. However,
and it's so
this one.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's interesting, because we still, even in like real life, have moments where we have to kind of go, okay, we understand why this person did what they did, and maybe it doesn't mean that they're an awful person, but they did do the bad thing. So
like maybe he had been like, they say later that he hit her sometimes, but in the 40s that like wasn't that big of a deal.
Well,
Like maybe if like we had seen him hit her a bunch and then she had like clapped back by shooting him, but the way that it all went down,
the way that they brought up the domestic violence felt like it was like, by the way, he's a really bad person. It seemed like somebody script wise halfway through the film was like, oh shit.
No, we started doing my Wedding Crashers problem. Yeah, we got to now make this person evil.
Yeah.
To relate to Owen Wilson, who's a womanizing cheater who's lying to women, Bradley Cooper needs to be a monster. And so it's like we have to get him on the stand. And to be fair, funny scene. And apparently the actress that Jamie mentioned almost didn't do the movie because of this scene where they're just like, she's fat. Did you say that she's fat? I did. What happened? She got fatter. She's a fatso. And I was like, oh yeah.
She's so hot.
And she's so hot.
And I'm like, she's fat?
This is a Tatiana problem again. I don't understand.
Making the connection.
Yeah, but it was crazy how you had to be like, no, this guy shamelessly got on the stand. It was like, I don't love her. I was fucking somebody else. Yeah. I beat her all the time. And I called her a fatty because like, I don't know how y'all handle your women. And then the guys were like, whoa.
Like, and then I was like, my brain is like, as bad as everything he's saying is, he still doesn't deserve to be shot.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the facts. I did love when she like paraded all these career women through the courtroom, even though it was nonsense, it didn't make sense. The fact that one like circus lady fucking lifted Spencer Tracy, I like that. There was so much fun stuff going on in this movie, and I just enjoyed their chemistry so much. I just wish it had been about a different case, because if it had been a little more like a little bit more, I can't decide who I'm rooting for, I would have loved this movie.
I love that scene you're talking about so much, because you could see in that moment that Katharine Hepburn, Amanda, her character, is like, okay, go ahead, lift him. And then when she has him up, he's like, oh crap, that is still my husband. I have to go home. Can you put him back down? Put him back down now. My bad. This is going on too far.
I also think that lady might have actually been doing all those stunts, because when she went back to the thing, she was out of breath.
Yeah.
And I'm like, either she's a phenomenal actor who was really working for her, or she actually did a bunch of shit.
I think the strings they forgot to pull out were actually just there in support. I feel like it looked like she actually did lift.
Yeah, I think so. I can't imagine them not doing it at that time. Like, there's a weird part of me that's just like, yeah, it's how they made the movies.
Right.
Lift this bench. Yeah, so many great. I loved how it was framed up with these like almost Looney Tune cursive, like the next morning.
I hated that too, though.
I loved it. It was so fun.
I get it. It's that evening. I don't need to know again. That evening.
That's like how they used to do those like really old comedies where they had to be like, and now comedy. And there was just something very like charming about it to me, where I was like, well, it also just showed how like probably cheap the movie was to make, where they're like, oh, we just need a courtroom and this living room, and we'll just simply tell the audience when we're there. Yeah. We won't have any transition scenes and get in cars.
Well, no cars, no walking sequences. We're just going to get there.
Yeah, and it really, like, you're right, Jamie. They should have picked a better case. But I think so much of the movie by the end was less about that and more about like them coming together. Mm-hmm. But I am still like, I would have liked some sort of resolution that was like, maybe you're both bad people. But I did enjoy it quite a bit.
It's only crazier just in the last shot of that when he wins, or when she wins, but then her kids come in and she's hugging her kids, and then he starts sliding in there with his kids and like, let's all hug together. And then the paparazzi are pushing the mistress into the frame with them. Like, what is going on?
Yeah, I also loved the juror that she was like, I don't believe that he should be here. And just roused up question. This guy's like, do you believe that men and women should be treated as equals? Well, no. And I was like, what an insane, like, I know that sexism exists still today, but I was like, what could you imagine that today?
Yeah, it's wild. You're watching this, and now in these times, I was like, man, they just didn't. We don't care. We'll just say it. No,
I really did not care for the neighbor who was so clearly trying to sleep with her. And then when he finally tried to, I was like, you're so bad at this. Because then he finally was like, I'm only trying to have sex with you because it's convenient. You're right next door. And I was like, well, that's a terrible reason to have sex.
If you're trying to get in her pants, that should fail by all accounts.
There should be people in just slightly further away who are less married than she is. That should be the range. But I was amazed how well it paired up with She-Hulk, because we are dealing with like themes of the law changing, and in one of them it is like superheroes, and one it's like very real women's rights that matter. And in ours, it's like, what do the wizards get to do now? But it's fun that dynamic is there. And even the way it's broken up almost reminded me of how they've been using the news and phones. And like, we keep having very clear act breaks in this show, like where it almost feels like an old comedy and like an old sitcom, and that they're very much, I'm sorry, we haven't faded out with like some dumb bass line to an establishing shot we know. But I just think it's very good. The comedy is very similar. There's just a lot of like, be honest now.
There's also a lot of like, I mean, She-Hulk does a good job of like taking the piss out of it, but being a woman in this male-dominated society, or this male-dominated field, that's a lot of what Adam's Ribs is about. Like, Katharine Hepburn's character is kind of like filling her way out, and every time she does something, the judge or her husband, which that's a problem, they will call her up like, hey, you don't know this, or you don't belong here, or you don't do this. When she does. They're just on the same level playing field. And She-Hulk is kind of like doing that now in the current times. Don't have to be as blatant as they were in Adam's Rib to call it out, because it wasn't so all in your face.
I mean, sometimes they do though. Like, we've got people on the stand, and he's just like, we're not gonna date her now that we've seen her. We've got a character who's like, I could totally get Megan Thee Stallion. There's a scene in episode 2 where he's like, there's a hot girl, I'm gonna go talk to it. And you're like, what a just gross. That's almost grosser than the guy on the stand be like, no, I don't like women. I'm like, you know what? They're both dicks. At least that dude was straight up about it.
Yeah.
But oh god, yeah, just scummy people in it. And even like the breakups, not like romantic ones, but story ones. They go to the bar and we decompress, and we spend so much time in their home, just them being like, this judge, am I right? I mean, he is terrible. I got to go back in there tomorrow though. Like, and it's so interesting watching that dynamic in two places, and watching these two sides always have to sort of come back together. But I had a great time watching the movie. I thought it was a delight. A weird delight.
I'm glad I watched this. I was pleasantly surprised and thoroughly enjoyed every minute of this one.
Apparently there was I think a show that was a remake of it that like crashed and burned. That they've tried a handful of times to bring this idea back, and every time it just doesn't get off the ground. And I was also reading that when they wrote it, it was inspired by the writer's friends who went through a divorce, and they got the same thing. A married couple defended or prosecuted one side or the other.
That's fascinating, because that sounds like, I mean, as a TV show, that would work. It seems like that would work so well. I mean, it's essentially like something like Castle or Moonstruck, where you have a female and male and opposite views and put them together in a courtroom. That sounds like it writes itself.
Well, and we'll talk about it a bit when we get to Ally McBeal, but when you sort of look at a lot of the history of like court shows, especially when it tries to be comedic, so many of them got a pilot or 4 episodes, and it's hard to connect it to an audience because you have to have like an interesting case and like both clear views of good and bad and also murky ones, and a clear antagonist and a clear protagonist. But that is our show, guys. We will be back very soon with the next episode. Of course, you can follow the show at Hollywood ADI on Twitter. I'm at As Always Blake. Terrence is at Terrence Tatum, and Jamie is at Jamie Jurok. Terrence has all of our Hollywood Already Did It YouTube channels, and Jamie has everything at comicbook.com. And we will see everybody in the illusion of time as soon as we can.
Bye.
Later.